Broward County happens to be particularly late to starting its recount. It's just getting started because it seems election workers in that county had been bogged down and tied up in just separating pieces of paper so that they would have the right pieces of paper to run through the machines just to get the recount started. And with that, yes, Snipes continues to be the focus of this national debate. And the question up for debate seems to be whether she is corrupt or inept. That's not a place you want to be. And you have former Governor Jeb Bush, who appointed her 15 years ago, now saying she has to go. And Tucker, here's where it gets interesting, because today she responded by saying, OK, she's going to put in her notice. She put in her 2 years notice. She just said she's not going to run for re-election in 2 years. So she's effectively saying, just let me get through this mess after all the other messes. Then let me manage the 2020 presidential election in Broward County. And then let me manage the race to find a successor for me, and then I'm out of here. I'll start with the good news for Senator Bill Nelson. We now know that the Democratic Party did, in fact, rally his supporters to make sure they get their mail-in ballots fixed if there are problems and finalized before the deadline. The bad news for Bill Nelson is that they got their dates mixed up and they gave the wrong deadline, telling people that you've got until Thursday, November 8th, when the election was Tuesday, November 6th. And the evidence for this is leading to the work of the Democratic Party of Florida, sending out these government forms, writing in the wrong date, effectively confusing people and leaving maybe a lot of Democrats to say, oh, Gilligan. And this is something that seems to have affected voters specifically in Broward County and 3 other counties. So stop and think about that for a moment. You have the Democratic Party apparently, 1, sabotaging conceivably Bill Nelson, 2, disenfranchising their own voters in this blunder, 3, shooting themselves in the foot, 4, trying to orchestrate this deadline rush, not knowing what the deadline was, and 5, conceivably breaking election law all in one fell swoop. This is something that the state has sent over to the feds to investigate. We'll see how that works out. One other blunder that stands out that has risen to the surface, you have continuing woes in Palm Beach County in southeast Florida, where you have faulty voting machines. Apparently, when they get stressed, they are old, they're aged to the point where they spit out erroneous results, which is causing election managers there to recount votes that had already been recounted. We're calling them the Monty Python machines because you feed them through. It's okay, 1, 2, 5, no, 3. Rick Scott ran up his lead through the first phase of the recount, which leaves Nelson in a position of being the political equivalent of Bruce Willis from Sixth Sense, and that his career is over. He just does not know it yet, and he is playing that out. And you have more blunders in southeast Florida counties, the Democratic strongholds. You have Palm Beach County. There, the bad news is that their machines continued to sputter and fail and melt down. And Palm Beach County fell flat on its face and was unable to complete the recount, meaning they just go back to their original results. If there's any good news there in Palm Beach County, it's that they're not Broward County to the south. And the good news, Tucker, in Broward County is that Brenda Snipes, after all the blunders, said she finally did it today. She finally did something right, that they, after all the hand-wringing, were able to meet the deadline to complete their recount. She said they did it with minutes to spare, and as she celebrated, the bad news is she forgot they had to transmit it to the state, and then they fumbled around with the computer, couldn't figure out how to do it in time. They were 2 minutes late, and as per the law in Florida, the recount results in Broward County got rejected by the state. When we say they mixed provisional ballots, the canvassing board had gone through to determine which ones they wanted to accept, which ones they wanted to reject, and then after that, jumbled some of them together, saying, oops, we got them mixed up. Now we don't know which one is which. It's an example of the kind of blunders we've seen not just this year, but in years prior. And when you combine that with Broward County election managers saying they didn't know or wouldn't say how many ballots they still have to count days after the election, and now they're saying, and Palm Beach County, too, they need more time. They don't see how they can complete a machine recount by Thursday, while some counties are already there or very close to it. When you look at all of these things, it's easy to see how people outside of Florida can look at this and say, nobody can be this stupid. There must be something nefarious going on here. Then you have the Scott Camp, Marco Rubio, and others looking at Broward County's recent history of breaking the law, illegally destroying ballots, raising suspicions in their minds as well. And with this, once again, it's all all about Florida, and it is all focused on Southeast Florida. There's history for that, too. Remember, Tucker, I know you do, in Palm Beach County when it designed the butterfly ballot in 2000 that Democrats wound up tricking Democrats into voting for Pat Buchanan. And Democrats will never forgive themselves for that. I don't think they will ever forgive themselves for this. But either way, it doesn't matter because once all is said and done, it'll be certified on Tuesday. Rick Scott is going to Washington, and Bill Nelson is going to get the home version of the game.
If they look up my charge, it says trafficking heroin.
When did you traffic heroin?
Never.
William Forrester is serving a sentence he did not deserve, according to state leaders, watchdogs, and even the judge who sentenced him.
I just squatted down in the corner and cried.
This 62-year-old man from Bradenton cries a lot. 16 years ago, doctors discovered he had cancer, and they cut out his lung. Then, after that surgery, you were in a world of hurt.
I was in so much pain.
That was just the start.
Because they had to go in 2 more times. I spent almost a whole year in the hospital.
Then doctors loaded him up with pills.
I would go get my prescriptions filled, and just the methadone at that time come in jugs like this, and I would take 12 a day.
That brings us to his crime 10 years ago.
One of the prescriptions had run out, and they wouldn't refill it. It wasn't time, it was too early.
Because you took too many, ran out.
Because I took too many, and I ran out early.
He forged a prescription to carry him through until the next month. You had forged the prescription in July.
In July, yes, sir.
When did you get a legal prescription for that same medication?
It would have been August the next month. About 3 months later, they come and arrested me. After she had continued to fill the prescriptions after that.
Under Florida law, that's drug trafficking, even though he never trafficked a pill.
I took the pills. They were for me.
So you trafficked them to yourself?
I trafficked them to myself, if you want to call it that, yes, sir. I never thought of that, yes, sir.
And under Florida law, that's a minimum of 15 years in prison. The judge called the sentence excessive, but said his hands were tied by the legislature.
That removes all the discretion from the judge. And so it doesn't let him look at the facts of the individual underlying facts of the case.
Republican State Senator Jeff Brandes says the legislature has abused justice and burned taxpayers in this way for years.
They were legislating by slogans, and you heard this 85%, 10-20 life, 3 strikes you're out. Those types of slogans kind of got into the lexicon and were easy for legislators to push forward. That is probably good marketing. It's horrible public policy because it removes all the discretion. William Forrester is not alone. Mary Nowling is a disabled 66-year-old grandmother in a Hernando County prison. She's also serving time meant for drug kingpins. Are you a drug kingpin?
No. No.
First, burglars broke into her home and beat her.
The guys jumped up with ski masks and gloves and guns. He grabbed me around my throat, pulled me in the house.
What did they do to you?
They took a 9mm and smashed me in the face like that.
That fueled her anxiety and depression.
And I lost my home, and I lost my mind.
You were homeless? Mm-hmm. Then a young man invited her to stay in his home.
We didn't have like a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship.
What do you think he was interested in offering you a place to stay?
My pain pills.
He asked her to sell her pain pills to a friend who turned out to be an informant.
All rise, come to order.
She also got 15 years. She said her judge shuddered as he gave out the sentence.
Took it right out of his hands. He went...
Like many snared for drug trafficking, she's a relatively low-level offender who is mentally ill, disabled, and poor.
They're taking mothers away from their children. They might be poor mothers. That's still better than no mother. The legislators that make these laws, they don't realize what they're doing.
Senator Brandes agrees, and he's leading a bipartisan push for reform.
So for me, it's allowing judges to have the ability to go below the mandatory minimums when the case deserves it, when justice demands it.
Conservative and progressive activists, Republicans and Democrats in the legislature want reform.
All rise,
And yet this year, the bill to give judges more discretion failed.
Largely they fail because there are still groups out there that want to maintain all the discretion with the prosecutors.
Meanwhile, William Forrester's judge noted we're paying more than $58 a day to keep him in prison.
So they've spent $200,000 to keep me in here for 10 years.
That's not counting his prescriptions and trips to the hospital.
And then the second time I went, I was coughing up blood.
A cancer survivor with a missing lung has a tendency to catch pneumonia.
I've seen people that have robbed banks, child molesting. I mean, some horrible crimes that get under 15 years.
Meanwhile, we're paying another $58 a day to keep Mary Nowling in prison, plus her medicine, and hundreds, if not thousands, of others who fit the same profile. A state report found most of Florida's oxy and hydrocodone trafficking convictions were for the equivalent of 1 or 2 prescriptions. So you don't have a cartel?
No, I'm not exactly sure what a cartel is.
She just wants to meet her grandkids who live too far away to visit.
I just want to hold all of them at once.
Who keeps sending her letters asking for Granny.
I would love to read to them. I would love for them to tell me, because they write in their letters, I love you, Grandma. I miss you. I want to see you.
This is Finn. Finn the poodle, 9 years old and loved to go to the beach. But he slipped out of his fence in September and he was poisoned.
He's completely limp. He just wouldn't move.
So their first thought was rat poisoning.
This is Costa. She was poisoned just down the street.
She was not flinching, she was just staring.
Vets treated 6 dogs in the same neighborhood in the town of Stewart, all poisoned.
Why, in a short period of time, were all these dogs showing up with the exact same symptoms and the exact same lab results?
Well, Finn the poodle would solve that mystery. He died at the vet, and his necropsy was a bombshell.
That he died from the toxic blue-green algae.
His body was basically infested with it.
Scientists said South Florida river water was not safe to drink. And now you see what happens when dogs gave it a try.
They were putting needles in her and her eyes weren't even blinking or flinching or anything.
Ashley Guzzi said Costa slipped out of her fence and a neighbor saw her drinking from the St. Lucie River.
It was maybe 4 or 5 hours.
After she drank the sludge?
Yes.
That she collapsed?
Yes. She walked a few feet and she was kind of rocking and then she just went over.
And while the toxic water does this to pets, scientists who study the toxins, like Dr. Larry Brand, say it can also affect humans years after they've been exposed.
And that's probably one of the more insidious parts of this thing, is that there are no short-term symptoms.
To see why, you have to see what's in this green slime and how our government feeds it.
Look at this. That's the water in Florida right now.
A state of emergency in Florida.
Well, I wish I hadn't splashed that on myself.
You sort of forget how close, clean, and marvelous Florida really is.
First, politicians sell Florida as a paradise for clean water and cheap subdivisions. Then we see how those things don't mix.
It's predominantly the commercial, the residential, and the agricultural operations north of the lake.
Running from Polk County through Orlando.
All the way down through Orlando into the lake.
Leaking septic tanks and chemical fertilizer leach into Lake Okeechobee, where it feeds these blooms of cyanobacteria we call toxic algae. And then to prevent flooding around the lake, our government pumps it east and west through our rivers and estuaries, where it emits a toxin called microcystin that struck the pets like venom.
All the dogs had high levels of microcystin in the urine and the blood.
Or can sicken people over time.
So this is what people are exposed to.
Well, scientists link microcystin to liver damage. The cyanobacteria also produce a toxin called BMAA that they've correlated with brain damage.
The BMAA in these blooms can lead to neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and ALS.
In Guam, researchers associated a spike in ALS-like disease in the 1950s to people who ate fruit bats contaminated with high levels of this BMAA. And when Dr. Brand tested shellfish in South Florida, he found they had more BMAA than the bats.
I found some fish and crabs which had concentrations of BMA twice as high as the fruit bats of Guam. You have no idea you've been exposed to it, and then 10 or 20 years later you might come down with a neurodegenerative disease.
That's a theory that scientists still debate, but there is no doubt the water flowing out of Lake Okeechobee is a toxic mess.
I would not eat those fish.
Which brings us to our trip to the lake. How many fish did you catch here?
About 12. Watch it.
And two men at opposite sides of the table.
A lot of people been getting sick. Yeah.
Ronaldo Diaz with the nonprofit Waterkeepers is testing the levels of toxins in the lake.
Yeah, the state needs to do something about it.
Right.
While Pastor Rob Johnson is preparing his feast. We have a toxic water crisis. You know that.
Yeah, I've heard about it.
But you wouldn't want to err on the side of caution?
Of course. But we're not. Are we there now? Would you go to a restaurant?
I'm going to go with yes. Ronaldo Diaz says there's just not enough communication. You see signs showing where to dump the fish guts, but no signs warning about the toxins in the water. So if you saw a sign posted said, warning cyanobacteria, you wouldn't eat the fish?
No, I wouldn't eat the fish.
And when the water looked like split pea soup, guacamole, I still saw people at the fillet tables pulling fish out of these waters, still eating them. But I saw a couple kids jumping in the water and swimming around in that green sludge, so it's pretty tough thing to deal with.
Back at the lake, Ronaldo Diaz was not testing water in the slugs of green slime. He took samples where the water appeared to be clear.
Anywhere between 5 to 10, you can see the line.
And he still found microcystin approaching the level considered too toxic to touch. The range is 5 to 10. What's considered safe to drink?
Safe to drink would be 1 part per billion. Microcystin is still present in the water, and it's present to a significant amount.
Again, that's the liver toxin. No one routinely tests for BMAA, the brain toxin. And Dr. Brand, who found it in our food chain, is now studying whether it can also get into the air.
Even though I can't say for sure the BMA is in the air, it certainly is a possibility.
While the families in Stewart are left to wait and worry.
It's difficult to understand that it could get to this point without any resolution.
Knowing their own pets are also their canaries in the coal mine. What worries you the most?
That this issue is not going to be fixed. Your heart sinks. You feel helpless.
American companies are losing jobs to companies in China, and our federal government is helping them do it. The Florida candy factory cranks out thousands of old-fashioned mints from vintage machines that have been clicking and clanking for more than 100 years.
Our oldest KH that produces our Angel Mint dates back to 1911, and our newest of which is 1925.
Why don't you just buy new machines?
Well, the truth of the matter is we can't afford it.
This would be the story of how efficient, persistent, and passionate a businessman like Scott Grimm can be.
We're what made America great, the small mom and pops.
But this is mostly the story of how this factory and many others get set up to fail and burned by our own government.
That's a tough pill to swallow.
They did everything right and still do. They boil sugar in kettles and pour it in slabs and spin it with flavor. They press it and feed it, cut it, wrap it, then haul it off for shipping as mince and taffy.
So we were working quite heavy, and we did a lot of packing for these theme parks.
Yes, they took off by supplying and shipping candy for the major theme parks in Florida. But our government gave a sweetheart deal to China, allowing Chinese companies to mail products from 8,000 miles away for a fraction of the price American companies like Florida Candy Factory have to pay just to mail it down the street.
Left us sort of out in the cold.
The theme parks took the cheaper shipping costs from China and pulled the plug on Scott. He had to cut from 25 workers down to 4.
Those were some of the hardest days that we had to go through.
And this goes far beyond the Florida Candy Factory. Records show the U.S. Postal Service is losing money by giving shipping discounts to our biggest economic competitor.
I'd love to hear from the politicians as to how is that possible.
I don't think that anyone had any clue about this.
Here at Mighty Mug, we make the most innovative coffee mug on the planet.
Jamie Smaldone is the CEO of Mighty Mug, a mug designed to not tip over. The Postal Service charges him around $6 to ship each one from his warehouse in New Jersey to customers around the nation. And 6 months ago, he discovered Chinese companies were ripping off his ads and selling knockoffs.
One that really stood out to us was one that was $5.69 with free shipping all the way from China.
As he dug into it, he discovered, as we did, the little-known agency called the Universal Postal Union. In short, we struck a deal with this postal arm of the United Nations to subsidize mail deliveries for less developed nations. And the Universal Postal Union considers China, the world's largest e-commerce market, to be less developed.
Just to put it in perspective, China is in the same basket as Cuba and Gabon and a lot of these like super primitive economic societies.
So we agreed to pay higher rates to send our products to China, crushing American exports. While the U.S. Postal Service has taken mounting losses, more than $135 million a year, subsidizing mail from other nations, particularly China, crushing American merchants.
You don't think that something so stupid could exist in our government.
Jamie says that's $6.30 for shipping a Mighty Mug from New Jersey, or $1.40 to get the knockoff from Shanghai. And when he started asking the politicians about this, he said most had no idea.
It's an insane thing, that's for sure.
While Mighty Mug, Florida Candy Factory, and so many others are paying for it.
And I've had more times than not customers call me saying that I'm ripping them off somehow because I'm charging too much for freight.
Leaving us with something American entrepreneurs thought they would never have to say in America.
We have ingenuity, we have hard workers, we just need the same opportunity, the same chance.
As China.
As China.